public at sea. Here, let me just note two central points. First, regional engagement or foreign policy activism is not a choice or an act of will. It's a natural function of the evolution of Turkey's internal political, economic, and social dynamics, coupled with the objective new regional developments that impact on those internal dynamics, which means that there is, in fact, no isolationist or non-engagement option for Turkey. Second, hegemonism reflects an underlying growth in both hard power and soft power. The two go hand in hand, and they are not alternatives to each other. You can't have soft power if you don't have hard power. Together, these 2 points explain why a policy of regional engagement that is both active and zero engagement, and zero problems, is an oxymoronic concept. You can't be active and have zero problems. Instead, an activist foreign policy will necessarily bump up against the interests of other regional powers, such as Russia, Iran, Israel, and of course the United States, sometimes, as Lenore suggested, in a convergent manner, and sometimes in a divergent manner. In Iraq, for example, I find it much easier to interpret the recent growth in Turkish influence as a reversion to the Ottoman-Persian competition in that arena, with Turkey finally abandoning its self-imposed paralysis by re-establishing its links to local communities, most notably the Kurds. I find it much easier to understand in those terms than as an expression of an EU-type complex interdependence in which everybody gains and nobody loses. Nevertheless, I'm going to focus my illustration on an aspect of Turkish soft power, the dimension of hegemony that involves an ideational or political culture aspect. And the most prominent political idea in the region today must surely be the idea of democratization. That's hence all the interest in the so-called Turkish model. What is the Turkish model? The way I understand it, it consists of a relatively successful balance between two forces. The often Islamically oriented populists, elected politicians, who, because they are elected, have to be in tune with the religious and cultural values of the population, who constitute a majority of the country, and the secular nationalists, who are still well entrenched in the state bureaucracy, especially the military and the judiciary, but who also have a popular constituency as well, although fewer in number, still constituting something like 30% or so of the electorate. It's this balance between them, the fact that neither can easily suppress the other altogether, that I think has helped moderate elements to prevail on both sides, and thus kept Turkish democracy more or less on track for over 6 decades now. Now the whole Middle East seems to be witnessing a democratizing upheaval. This unfolding revolution is more in accord with the interests of Turkey than with those of its main regional competitors, Russia, Iran, and Israel, all of whom have adopted a basically negative posture towards it. Right? But it has to be said, first of all, to begin with, that Turkey's initial reaction to these events, whatever may have actually been going on behind the scenes and whatever constructive advice Turkish officials might have been giving to Syrian and Libyan leaders, the perception that Turkey was aligning with the governments against their popular opposition movements in Libya and Syria was almost disastrous in terms of Turkish foreign policy. For a while there, it looked like a calamity, like the entire active engagement policy was going to blow up in their faces. Nevertheless, luckily, the recovery has been swift. Turkey is moving rapidly to align itself with the popular opposition in these movements, in these countries, and is now on track to really help shape what happens, I think particularly in Syria. Indeed, I'd suggest to you that Syria may well be the best candidate for an application of the Turkish model in the Arab world. Most critically, does it appear that the basis for a political balance analogous to the one in Turkey exists in Syria. Beyond some striking general cultural similarities, it would appear that Syria has both an Islamically oriented populist majority, represented by groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood, and a smaller but still substantial secularist constituency. If you just look at it in terms of demographics, a country that is 10% Alawi, 10% more or less Christian, 10% Kurdish, right there you have a 30% basis. All three communities, for different reasons, are going to oppose a Sunni Islamic fundamentalist type regime. So right there, you've got the basis for a secularist opposition. Right? No wonder, therefore, that when the 2009 TESEV, Turkish think tank, poll in 7 Arab countries asked three key questions. Whether the Turkish political system constitutes a successful synthesis of Islam and democracy, whether Turkey therefore serves as a model for the Arab world, and whether Turkey should play a larger role in the region. All three questions were answered with high positives in all 7 Arab countries. But the highest answers for all three questions came from Syria, and with 72%, 72%, and 82% respectively for these three questions. I suggest, therefore, that Turkey is uniquely positioned to help socialize both sides of the Syrian political equation into democratic norms and practices. The Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, on the one hand, which can be expected to be responsive to the Ak Party experience, on the other, the Syrian military and judicial establishments, which can learn a lot about how to reform themselves from their Turkish counterparts. If one thinks of how Turkey itself helped to be socialized into democratic norms, the dynamic was essentially indigenous, but it helped, I think, to have, for example, the military integrated into NATO, a perfect example of a combination of soft power and hard power coming from the United States. Right? And if one now turns it around and says, how could Turkey have an influence in the Arab world? Well, that would raise the prospect of maybe a Turkish NATO in the region that would have both a security component and this kind of socializing component. Just throw it out as an interesting idea. In conclusion, then, Turkey's return to the Middle East goes beyond functional cooperation or regional or economic integration. It represents a profound change in the regional balance of power, as well as in the regional balance of political ideas. Because it's a consequence ultimately of internal Turkish development and growth, it's driven by a logic as natural as the laws of physics. And again, it's not simply an act of will or temperament, as it was, for example, in the 1950s. How one feels about this return depends on subjective calculations of benefit and cost. Many Arabs, however, are likely to feel much as the great thinker Ibn Khaldun did over 600 years ago, when he too surveyed a region racked by internal turmoil and decadence, and beset by external enemies on all sides, and rejoiced that God had sent to the Muslims, quote, out of this Turkish people and out of its mighty and numerous tribes, guardian emirs, and devoted defenders characterized by youthful strength and vigor. Today, once again, Turkey offers the potential to introduce a much-needed fresh spirit to a bankrupt and decaying, and now apparently finally collapsing, Middle Eastern political order. Thank you.
Fantastic. 8 minutes, 47 seconds. We'll start with questions, and if I may, I'll ask the first one, and I'll address it to you. So when you look at the situation in Syria, and you look at the relationship between Turkey and Syria, which had been showcased as a success for the zero problems policy, do you think that part of the problem is that this policy relied too much on personal ties with leaders? President Assad is certainly not listening to Prime Minister Erdogan at the moment, and I can only assume that Mr. Erdogan feels rather personally offended.
Interesting way of putting it, but no, the policy, the zero problem policy, we call it neighborhood policy, and I agree zero problems is an ultimate objective, but in a real world, obviously, it's very hard to achieve. So the neighborhood policy, as we call it, is not based only on personal relationships with leaders, although in modern politics there is no doubt that the quality of the relationship between leaders has an important contribution to how the relationship is finally shaped, especially in countries like Syria, Libya, etc. But when I outlined the basics of the neighborhood policy, the third element, apart from the deepening of political dialogue and the increasing of trade, is to engage people-to-people contact.